Chris, thank you for joining me. Where does today's recording find you?
I'm in Orange County, California, and it finds me very well. Thank you.
Chris, how do you describe yourself?
God, that's an interesting question. How do I describe myself? I don't know. Like most people, a human being with a lot of different titles and a lot of different, I guess, layers. Depends on who you're talking to. But on a professional level, I'm someone who just seems to have somehow luckily followed the wind into a couple different things and been very fortunate to have had businesses, have new businesses, to be a speaker, to be an author. And most of that just happened out of me being curious and willing to say yes and to go try things. Not out of some master plan that I wrote down, 20 years ago that I've been executing on. It's more like, oh, that looks interesting. Let's go try that. I think that's kind of been my guiding thing of like, does it excite me? Do I want to do it? Do I get joy out of it? If it does, cool, let's go do it. And if not, then, let it go.
What are some of those things that you have been interested in and, those things you've been willing to say yes to?
I said yes to starting a company back in 2001. I was working for somebody else that I didn't like and, just sort of was taking that safe route of I have a mortgage and I have a car payment. I'll just let somebody else worry about the business and I just take a check. And so September 11th happened and that was like my, hey, dummy, like you're supposed to be doing this other stuff. And that was like, okay, I have this idea. Let's go run with that. And that did that for 20 plus years and then sold the company. Along that way, someone asked me to be on a podcast, like in a studio in a real radio, like a radio station kind of a scenario. And the guy who ran uh, that studio said, hey, that was interesting. You should actually have your own show. And I'm like, okay, that seems interesting. And I did that for 10 years. Most except, COVID and all that, like most of the time in an actual studio and bringing in guests or sometimes virtually. And because I did that, like a publisher came and knocked on my door and was like, hey, do you want to write a book? And I'm like, don't tell my fifth grade, English teacher because they'll laugh that I would ever be an author. But like, sure, that seems interesting. Let's go try that. I mean, those are like the kinds of things that kept happening. And same thing with speaking. Someone came and asked me, like, hey, we heard your company does cool stuff with culture. Will you come talk to us about it? And there I was in front of 6 HR folks in the back of a Best Western having a pancake breakfast and like talking to them about culture. And 15 years later, I'm doing this. That's like my full-time job. So it's just, I think people ask you to do stuff and I'm sure I said yes to 1,000 things that didn't go anywhere, but I said yes to those things that did go somewhere. And I think that's the thing I always try to remind people of is like that first step is saying yes.
You said that you got asked to be on a podcast because your company worked in culture, or was it the radio show at that point?
So I got asked to be on the radio show because of some of the things we were named one of the best places to work in our area, like year after year. And I think someone else who was focusing on leadership, it's like, hey, you guys keep showing up on this list. Let's come tell us what you're doing. Come talk about it. Um, and so, anyways, when they asked me to go do a radio show, I went back to my team and I'm like, this guy wants me to do a radio show. And they were like, oh my gosh, you have to do this, Chris. And I'm like, what are you guys talking about? And they were like, you read these books, you come back to these conferences, you tell us all these things. And like, we appreciate it, Chris, but like, you need an outlet to go talk about that stuff over there, like to another audience. And I was, oh, all right. And like kind of jumped at it.
You mentioned writing a book, and I read, as I mentioned before we started recording, The Power of Company Culture. You have published a second edition of that. I think that was a few years ago, if I recall correctly. And I believe you had a second book as well. You talk in The Power of Company Culture about your business and the radio show and all of that. So before we get into your speaking and your interests and all this, would you mind giving me a little bit of background on what your company did? And I'm really curious about the radio show as well. And then we can talk about the book and so on.
Yeah. So my company was a background check and a human capital company. We did, if you were hiring somebody, then we were there to help you with assessments and drug testing and background checks and all the compliance and the whole thing. Um, and so it wasn't a particularly sexy company. I mean, it was just boring old compliance and making sure, criminals didn't end up getting access to your money or to your children or things like that. But I think the interesting part of that was I learned, about 2009 that how I was running the company was wildly flawed. I had a very antiquated and I would say a very traditional view of how to run a company, how to manage people. And when the recession hit in 2009, the company was not able to help me. They all just essentially stared at me and said, "Tell us what to do, Chris." And I was like, "That's not the kind of company I want." Like when you know what hits the fan, like I want to people who are coming to me with ideas that are, motivated and have ownership and you know, the capacity to help me. I don't need a bunch of robots who can just help me during the good times. I need, good thinkers and people are passionate about saving the organization when we hit the bad times. And so I totally retooled the organization and totally changed how I operated. That's the most important story is I, as the CEO, totally changed my operating system and what I did and what I cared about and how I spent my time. I no longer spent my time kind of helping sales and kind of helping marketing, kind of help. Instead, I spent all my time like, how do I help people meet better? How do I help them get their work done more efficiently? Became the person who had the virtual machete out and was helping them cut through the crap every day instead of like, how do I come in and tell you how to do your job? We hired you to do your job. Will you go do your job? I'm going to help you. Like, you're in 500 meetings all week. Like, how do we cut that down to 200 instead of 500? Like, how do I help you be more efficient? Like, that became my job. And so I just thought I was doing the right thing for my company. Turns out that I was considered a crazy person, that I was doing these things that nobody else would ever think of doing, that I was this outlier. And I just thought it was common sense. I thought it was what I was seeing the best organizations do really well. And so that just kind of caught fire. And that's how I was offered the radio show. That's how I was offered the book. And the rest is history.
Were there books or speakers or thinkers or anything like that that helped you figure out what your new model or approach should be or the things you should try out?
Sure. So certainly think of some books like Good to Great, where I was okay with being company being good, but how do you make it great? And later on, my North Star became I want my organization to be the best place that my employees will ever work in their career. They may not be with me forever. They may not stay the whole time. I'm not looking for people to be lifers necessarily, but when they're on their deathbed and if someone says, "Where's the best place you ever worked?" They're gonna be like, "That company, the one that, Chris's company." That's what I wanted. And that's now what I help organizations do. When I'm there speaking, when I'm consulting, I'm helping organizations create the best place their employees are ever gonna work. And the good news about that is we all can do that. It's not like there's only one gold medalist and only one company can do it, and then there's second place and a third. We all can achieve that goal if we want to. Um, the Great Game of Business by Jack Stack, that really taught me about the value and what can happen when we are radically transparent at work. So when you actually give people your P&L, you actually tell people how the business is run, you actually show them the goals, and we're wildly transparent with each other. It's amazing how they have better ideas. It's amazing how they're actually able to help you when they actually know what you know, instead of us holding all that, as some sacred cow away from everything else that they're doing. Um, there's the Carrot Principle, Chester Eldon, and there's tons of great books out there that really got me thinking about how do I do things differently. Um, and that was the starting point, right? And then we developed that into a system, and then we began. working with hundreds of other organizations and saw it worked for them. We had Walden University actually did a major research study and proved that the 7 pillars that we had identified were actually the correct 7 pillars. That's what organizations do need to focus on to be successful. But it kind of layered over time. But like those were the starting points.
How much did this retooling involve changing your habits and behaviors? And then how much did it involve changing the people who were in your organization? Or there are, I'm sure, other things, Chris, there, processes, technology, whatever else. What went into this?
So the most important thing I always want people to remember is that with any change or in any focus here, in any goal of us wanting to have a great culture and a great company, and even if you're like, I just want to make a lot of money and I don't care about my people, even if that's your terrible view of the world, it still works. This is still applicable. Hopefully that's not, but like it still works. It's people first. We have to figure out how to help our people first. And then we figure out what are the processes that will help our people be- do their best work. And then what are the tools? And last, what is the technology? And yet we have seen this time and time again. We are seeing it right now with AI that people are coming in and saying, here's this great new technology. Has all these cool tools, figure it out. And then article after article and study after study, the productivity gains are not there. They're not getting input. A bunch of CEOs went and fired a bunch of employees and had to hire them back because the AI didn't do what they thought it was going to do because they're not starting with the people, right? That's the most important thing. So I had to start with what are the things that I need to think about and do for my people first before I worried about all the other parts. That was one half. Now the other half, to address your question, like what did I have to do differently? And what I figured out pretty quickly, and this is actually a lesson I got from, therapy, was you can only do your 50%. I can't make anybody else do their part. Now I have the luxury, I would guess we all have the luxury in any relationship to stop that relationship. It's a lot easier probably to let an employee go than it is to get a divorce. But you in any relationship, you got your part. And so are you doing your part as the best you can? And what I found was that when I really upped my game and I was delivering on my 50%, how much better my employees got, how much more they showed up, and how much more they did the things that I wanted them to do as a part of their 50%. And so wha- it's pretty common for us to be under delivering as a leader and yet expecting our people to be outperforming and to be delivering us more than that 50%. And that's just not going to work. And I'll give you the biggest example of this was that I stopped telling people the answer to questions. If what I want from people is great ideas and I want them to think about things and I want them to come up with solutions and I want them to be actively integrated into the business, I can't just give them the answer every time because then they don't know how to get to the answer the next time on their own. They're just using me as the crutch. If someone came to me was going to make $1 million mistake, yes, I would stop them and give them the answer. But like, I was willing to let them go make a $15,000 error just to get a learn. I was willing to let them go screw it up, potentially like they're going to go down the wrong path. And I would, I'd ask them questions. They'd be like, I think this is the way I should go. Great. Go try it out. Let me know how it works. And they would come back to me. It didn't work. I screwed it up. This got messed up. Okay. How are you going to fix it? I went through that very painful process for a year and then I never had to do it again. I had the most people were totally understood how to do everything. They understood how everything worked. They understood how I wanted things done. And but I was like just giving him the answer. And so when times got tough, just go to Chris and ask him how to do it. The bad news is I don't know how to do everything perfectly. My one brain is not the actual correct answer for all questions. And so they actually came back with better answers and better solutions over time. I could tell you a story about what happened in COVID. Look at this sort of massive shift that we had during that time. But that was the kind of the really big shifts I had to think about.
As you're talking, you're reminding me about the inner game, and let's see who developed that. The book, The Inner Game of Tennis, was written by Timothy Galway, if I recall correctly. And then there were a couple of gentlemen who developed that further, and there are some models and some tools that they built upon that. One that I'm a big fan of is called Grow, and it's a coaching tool, a focusing tool, essentially. But as you're describing your situation, and like you said, you had a really painful year. You're reminding me that I think it was McKinsey, maybe, that studied these coaches, and they found that with this approach that they took, some of the things were active listening, not telling the players what to do, but rather when a tennis coach was coaching a tennis player, instead of saying, no, step like this or twist the racket like that, if they said, well, what did you notice? And they asked them to bring out of themselves what, they already saw or the way that they already understood things, rather than trying to put, if I take and put into your mind, Chris, the words that describe what the way that I see things, you just receive my words differently because you see the world slightly differently. You understand the game of tennis or whatever we're talking about. I think it was McKinsey that studied these coaches, and they found that when they took this approach from the inner game and they applied them in sports where the coach didn't actually play the sport, that the athletes performed better. And I think I recall that they took these tennis coaches and they had them coach golf and skiing, like moguls and slalom, and I don't know what else. And because the coaches weren't able to say, you're supposed to be doing this, Chris, they had to just ask them questions, more or less. And, if the athlete said, well, what do you think I should do in this situation? I'm way oversimplifying this, but you could imagine a situation, Chris, where someone in accounting comes to you and they say, how am I supposed to process this thing? And because you don't know, you say, well, how do you think you're supposed to process it? And then when they give you an answer and you don't know if it's a good idea or not, you can say, well, why don't you give that a try? Or you can say, I don't know, but do you think that really makes sense? And as you're talking, you're reminding me of this. This is an approach that I'm a big fan of. And, whether you use the same labels, right, of the inner game or active listening or whatever else, I find that if you have the right kind of culture, the right kind of people, where you can over time habituate people to, I can go to Chris and I can bounce ideas off of him and I can tell him I've run into a wall and I'm trying to go over, around, whatever, but I'm just not solving this. But he might be able to talk it through with me.
Right.
Then you hopefully don't have to have all the answers, but you can at least be a reasonable person and say, I don't know, but have you thought of this? And then hopefully they end up finding solutions that are actually better because they're closer to the problem.
Yeah, and that's actually the reason why Scrum and Agile has been so effective in, especially in software builds, because they actually bring those teams together and they don't just have a team of developers. It's often a team that's got one member of sales, a member of accounting, a member of customer service, a couple programmers. Like they understand the whole need of the client across all these different departments. And so, what the heck does someone in accounting know about the software? Well, they don't, but they know that the person wants to be able to download their invoice in a PDF. Like they understand like certain challenges the developer would never have thought of. And that's why those shops that run that program are so effective because they've got these perspectives that are 360 degrees around. And so you're bringing up a great point. I just had to get out of the habit because when I started the company, there was 5 of us in a little tiny office. And I was the only one that knew how to run the business. And they would just come and ask me how to do the thing. And in the beginning, that was the correct model because they didn't know anything. I just never undid that bad habit. I didn't realize that I was training them to just not even think. It was just go ask Chris. And I love that example you gave because I have made the joke. I coached for many, many years. I coached water polo, swimming, soccer, basketball. I mean, so many youth sports and competitive sports. I did junior Olympic swimming, and um, I have jokingly said, "You put me on any sport, and I can go and coach them. I don't need to know. I mean, I can go look it up. I can get the rules of the game. The whole like Ted Lasso, and he went like from being a football player to coaching soccer. Like that's not that crazy to me. Like that, I would have been that crazy to say, sure, I'll do that. I don't know anything about that because a good coach is a good coach. You know, maybe not at the professional level. That's not going to work. But like, I mean, I have thought I could go coach in the NFL. Like I could figure. I don't need to have actually done that thing. Getting the most out of somebody, helping them achieve their best or some level of like the right process is the right process, and you don't necessarily have to have the shared all of the shared experiences. Maybe at the most elite level you do, but like I think your point is very well taken that it's more about helping someone see it for themselves, and helping them through that than anything else.
As you were going through this learning process and the transformation of sorts for your own business, I realize this is just one case, but you described it as, I think, a very painful year. What was the experience like, or what do you believe the experience was like for the people that worked with you?
I'm sure that they were went through a bit of an adjustment. I remember during that time that it was such an acute problem. We were trying to save the business. We were trying to deal with the recession. I was trying to totally change how we do things, and I didn't really have time to say, "Hey, everyone, how do you feel about this?" It was like, "This is what we're doing. Get on board or get out." Like, yeah, and they ultimately saw it was for their benefit and it was better, so they did. But, in hindsight, it was like, I probably should have been measuring satisfaction, or I probably should have been asking them like, those kinds of questions, but I didn't. It was, sink or swim kind of those scenario. Um, but, y you know, we were trying to be the first thing that we did was being radically transparent, and so we were telling them what we were trying to do, we were telling them why we were trying to do it, we were telling them when we tried something and it didn't work, and then here's how we fixed it, or here's what we did instead, and so they were very aware of all of this, and it wasn't like they just showed up and all of a sudden their desks were in a different position and they didn't know why. Like, I mean, everything was we were over communicating along the way, even if we weren't asking them how they felt about it.
One of your responses to me was that you realized you always start with the people, then process, then technology. And so, how did you come to that realization?
As I looked at the best organizations, I went and studied a lot of them, talked to a lot of mentors, a lot of great leaders, people that, whose businesses did great, and asking them like questions about what they did and how they did things and what they, and probably more important than what they didn't do. It became very apparent that the best leaders and the best organizations were thinking about all of their problems and all of their initiatives and all of that, like through the lens of people first. And so I started there and I was like, well, that's clear that the best organizations think about everything through the lens of their people first. And that's your employees. It's also your clients. It's also your vendors, like any of the people involved in your making your organization run and be successful. And then from there, it was like, okay, but then what was step two? And as we asked those questions, it just became obvious it was process. Um, Good organizations had good processes. They had they had thought about those things. Now they challenged them and they came up with new ones and they changed them. And it wasn't like this is how we do things and we'll never change. But they were really clear with people on we know what a good we know what a if you're a nurse, we know what a good shift looks like. We know what are the steps, what are the things you're supposed to do, when you give medications, when you check on like there's a pretty well-known process here of like when do we do things and how do we keep patients safe and all right? Like those It's not like you don't just show up to be a nurse and then like figure it out. Like there's some level of process in there. And so it seemed natural to me that that was the order, right? And also looking at it from the other end, what were the organizations who were struggling the most? What were they what were they doing? And they were starting with technology or tools every single time, right? And so that's just so I sort of created this like people that like greater than process, greater than tools, greater than technology, motto.
And earlier, when you brought up this order, if I can call it that, you said something to the effect of, and we're seeing problems with this today with AI. So I'm curious whether it's specific examples or not. What is it that you're seeing? Are you seeing that people are just, saying the executives go away and they come back and they say, we're going to be an AI first company? Or what are you seeing nowadays?
There are just some things that never change, it feels like. And this is one of them, right? They go in the room, the boardroom, and they go, hey, how we're gonna do this. And they open the door and they go, hey everyone, now you're doing that. And then they shut the door and then, okay, but why? And what are the goals? And how are we supposed to do it? And how does this impact me? Why is this good for me? Um, and there was an example of an executive who said they fired like 80% of their staff or something like this because they wouldn't adopt the AI. And he basically said it was easier to fire all those people and rehire new people who would do what he wanted, which I thought was like, what an example of like terrible leadership. And if you couldn't figure out how to work with your current people, and instead had to hire people under the like, your new job is you will do this as a way to get conformity. Wait until the next initiative, and all those people that came in new, or they're all going to get fired, right? That's just like a really bad way to make. But that's how people do it. They don't want to spend the time working with people to help them get where they need to be, because it's like a little bit harder. It's better, but it's a little bit harder. And like anything good, right? Eating well, it's a little bit harder, but it's better for you. Exercising, it's a little bit harder, but it's better for you. And it's the same thing. Helping your people, first is a little bit harder, but it's going to get you the best benefit.
I had this gentleman, Kyle McDowell, on. He wrote the name of the book, I have it right down here, is Begin with We. And essentially it's 10 principles. They all start with we. We will do this. We are like this, and I liked the book. I really liked talking to Kyle, but I recall at one point him saying something, and please do tell me if you disagree or if there's nuance to this, but we were talking about responsibility, or I don't recall exactly what it was. And he said, none of this stuff is mysterious or hard. It's actually quite obvious. The hard part is actually doing it. If it's getting in shape or whatever, you have to eat right pretty much every day. You have to exercise, whatever form that takes, you have to do it every day. And I feel like some of what you're saying is some of these things are rather obvious when you put in the time or you've tried a number of different approaches, whatever. And it's not a matter of these things being new necessarily, as a good leadership, if I can broadly characterize it as this. It's more a matter of, are you willing to stick to it for that painful year, perhaps in your case?
Probably the best way, to kind of recapture what he was saying is that people like us do things like this. And that's really an important distinction that you have to figure out. Again, if you look at the best organizations, let's take Disney, for example, how Disney operates and what they do and how they treat cast members and how they talk and the secret language, and even down to their insane dress code. You can only have one set of earrings, and there's like they're very just prescriptive of like what they expect from people who are front of house, let's say, actually with or on guests and all of that. And And you can like that or not like that. You can say, that's not for me, and that's okay. But they're very clear that people like us operate like this. And they have a particular view of the world. They have a particular outcome that they're trying to get. And it's for the benefit of the organization and for the benefit of the guests who come to their parks and their hotels and all of that. Again, you as the employee can decide if you're good with that or not. And so what's awesome about Disney is they're so upfront about it. They are wildly transparent. They tell them, they train them, they talk about it. In fact, it's interesting. They're talking about doing a huge retraining for a lot of cast members right now because a lot of them were hired very quickly. They lost some really long-term employees because of COVID. They made a big mistake by laying off a bunch of them, not knowing what was going to happen. And then a lot of those people didn't come back. And so they had to hire a lot of fresh faces, and they're saying that they don't have quite the guest experience that they're wanting that they used to have. And so, but again, it's like they had to do it so quickly. They probably were cutting corners a little bit with people like us do things like that. And but when you're that honest, and then the employee signs up, and then they've gone the first couple days and weeks and months, and like it's pretty clear. Are you one of us or not? And if you continue to say yes to that question, you're going to continue to be happy in that organization. And if the answer is no, well, that's when your 3 months comes up. It's time you need to go get another job, right? That's the only real way for organizations to operate is for them to be. And Netflix is another great example of like things if they won't rehire, like if they wouldn't rehire them, like after what they know after the 3 months or whatever that time period is, like if they say, if I wouldn't rehire them now today, knowing what I know about them after they've been here, they need to go. And they give them a really nice severance package and all of that. But like they're ruthless about if you're not someone like us, like this isn't, you don't follow this prescription, then it's not a right fit.
You've said the word, I think we've both said the word culture, and it's in the title of one of your books. And you, I think when you say, people like us, that's more or less the way that I will characterize some of the unconscious and, the social learning aspect of culture as opposed to values, which have to be stated, but can be interpreted in a number of different ways. But I'm going to, before I throw something, you know, too out of left field at you, can you, would you mind describing your book, The Power of Company Culture, and then tell me how that kind of plays into either the consulting you do or your thinking today?
Sure. So the book is really three parts. It's what do you got to do to at least be good? What are the basics of a good culture? So you mentioned values, statements, and like how do we be clear and how do we figure out who we are, what we care about, and communicate that to our people? So what's the baseline of like good culture? And if you want to stop there, you can stop reading at the end of the part one. I mean, that's like that you want to do that. Now, you're never going to be the market leader. You're never going to maximize profit, performance, or productivity, but you at least know what to do not to suck. Part two is what do you have to do to be great? And that's all my research, and that's all the case studies with NASA and VaynerMedia and Caesars Entertainment and like all these big companies that I went and did some work with and really dove in and to understand them at a really deep level. What do you have to do to be great? And that gets into the 7 pillars that I mentioned. So what are those 7 things? How do you do them? Give you good examples of them. I even give you like different ways to do it. So in the recognition pillar, I tell you what Caesars does, and then I tell you what I did. And they're really radically different, but it's just you need to figure out how to do it for yourself. The last part of the book, the third part, is let's say you agree with me. Let's say you think this is correct. Let's say you've made it this far in the book and you're like, Chris, I'm going to do this. I'm going to make my team or my company or my division or my department or whatever it is you actually have authority over. I'm going to make it the best it can be. How do you actually get people to change? And so the third part is really the change management piece of how do we deal with cognitive biases? How do we deal with helping people understand change, deal with change? How do we talk to each other, get better feedback? Like all the messy human stuff that we tend to screw up. That's what that's about. And what's interesting is that is actually the most up to date, relevant thing that I'm dealing with or I'm talking to organizations about right now because they're going through so much change. My most popular keynote and the thing that I'm helping organizations the most with right now is thriving through relentless change. And I'm using that toolkit from that third part of the book. So you might say, I have a great culture or I'm good to go. I just need to know how to deal with all this AI stuff. Well, go buy the book and just go to the section 3, and you could just read the change management part and that would be fine. Um, because that's really the thing we're struggling with right now. In my new book that comes out in March, I'm targeting something else, for leaders, but that's really the crux of the work that I've been doing in the last 2 or 3 years, but especially in the last year, it has become acutely the number one thing that organizations are screaming for help with is help how do we deal with all this change? Why is all this change happening? And how the heck do I get my people, to make a hard left turn so we can keep the organization going?
Has your thinking about change changed since you've, written your books or changed in the last year as people are asking more for this kind of work?
Not really. It's still, again, there are some things that just don't ever change. You can bring in AI and change how we do the work, but like the change management piece is still the same. Humans are still the same. All of these problems are still the same. It was a different problem 10 years ago than it was, different problem 5 years ago, and now it's a different problem today, but it's still the same problem when it comes to the human beings involved. And so, and I would say the biggest thing is that we want people to change. We want people to do something. So I'll give you a really silly example. Let's say you happen to walk into a room in some building. You don't know me. I don't know you. And I open up a door and there's a very dark room in there. And I say, hey, will you come in this room with me? You should say, "Hell no," because you don't know what is in that dark room. You don't know anything about anything. Like, you have no context, you have no information, and yet, we do this all the time at work. Like, "Hey, I'm in accounting, you don't know me, but I need you to do all these things for me." And you're like, "I don't know you. I don't know what you want from me. Like, I don't know what a success looks like. I don't yeah, okay," and maybe get forced to do it because your boss said so, but, like, tons of resistance. But if we move people up the level of understanding, again, this is being transparent, this is spending the time to explain things to people, this is starting with people, we will get more engagement. So if you kind of think of this is like that X and Y graph, and like think about a nice little, like go back to geometry class or trigonometry or whatever, right? The bottom left is like, I know nothing and I'm going to do nothing. You might have told me you want that report, but I don't know who you are. I don't know what you want. I'm not going to that dark room with you. No. Now, if someone else walks in the room and goes, "Oh, hey, I see you met my friend Chris. He's a really nice guy," and I'm like, "Yeah, I'm sorry I didn't introduce myself. I can't find the light switch. I lost my glasses." Like suddenly you're getting more information and it makes a little more sense about why I'm asking you to come in this dark room and help me. Like, and some other friend told you I'm a nice person. Like, you might still be a little cautious, but like more information suddenly gets you to move to do something for me, to change your behavior, to do something. And that's literally what we focus on. How do we help people deeply understand? The more we can help them deeply understand. Not everybody wants to deeply understand. That is a problem. And sometimes they get to a certain level of understanding and they don't want to go any farther, and their engagement level gets stuck. And that might be okay at their position. It also might mean that they need to go. They may not be the right person in that job anymore, if they're not willing to go farther with their understanding. But I, again, controlling my 50%, I can try to help them become a deep expert in whatever it is I'm asking or whatever it is we're dealing with so that they will be more engaged and want to do more. That's start with that, right? There's a million other tricks and a million other things to deal with, but like they got to understand if you want them to do something.
I forget how you put it earlier, Chris, but I think maybe you were talking about Disney and saying, they're very upfront with who they are, what their expectations are. Do you think that it's fair for me to assume that a lot of organizations don't know who they are? And that's part of the reason that you get hired into a job and then it turns out that it's a very different experience from what you were sold on, or that from year to year to year, our approach, at least as dictated by the executives, seems to change based on whatever business book they read recently. It's that they don't kind of have a foundation or a North Star that it sounds like maybe you had at one point, certainly as you started to change.
Yeah, and those things happen. And I always suggest to people that if they don't feel like they're in the right place for them and that they again they're doing their 50% to bring up those concerns to be the best teammate they can to navigate, there's always going to be changes and like maybe an executive is going to want to go in a direction you didn't want to go, but like are we still doing something I can get behind? Are we still a good company? And maybe it's not, they want to go left and I would have gone right, but like that's okay. Like, you know what I mean? There's a level there. But like ultimately, if you think this is not what I signed up for, or this is like, this company is just constantly getting in its way because it's like whatever book they read this month and they can't, if you have the ability to go find another job, go find another job. Like we have a very short time on this earth. You should be, we've spent way too much time at work. Like, do not waste your time. Now, I understand there are some people that don't have maybe the ability to get in their job easily. Maybe there's a limited supply of those types of jobs. Maybe where they live, there's a limited supply. There's a whole equation there. But if you can, go find something else. Go do something else. As long as you can, feed yourself and your family and your responsibilities. Like, you have to weigh all those decisions. But again, like all things being normal, if you're not happy, then go find some. This is a saying that I say all the time in my keynotes. What you are not changing, you are choosing. So if you don't like it and you're not choosing to fix it or to change it, whose fault is it? It's not the executive's fault. They're gonna keep doing what they're doing. So I understand there are situations where you can't change and you're stuck in that company. You may be, my wife's a teacher. Like, they get put in a school and like they're in the classroom and like they may not like us or maybe take a long time to make a change. You may work in the military and like you're in the division and you get a new sergeant. Like you can't change that. I get that. We don't have the same level of freedom, but as much as you can take control of that, you should.
I forget where I encountered this saying, but you said kind of a, a variation of this. And it is, if you see something that is not up to standard and you don't fix it, you've set a new standard. And I think we could apply this in any number of places, but you said something earlier about if you as the leader are, not delivering or you're, not doing your job or something along those lines, and you're expecting that everybody else is doing exactly what you say or whatever, then it's going to be hard for them to follow through or live up to your expectations. And you just remind me of that. And I think of this quite often because I try not to be, I don't know, Chris, what we would call it, OCD or anal or something like that about there are right ways of doing things because sometimes the right, quote unquote, right way in my mind is just one way of doing things, right? But I think when we get together in organizations, to come back around to one thing you said, people like us do these things or act in these ways or whatever else. That becomes really important that, like culture is one way of describing culture is a process of social learning. You know, this is a very stupid example, but I use it often. Like, Chris, you or I don't have to touch a hot stove to know you just don't touch a hot stove. We have been told that other people have touched hot stoves and they say, oh, yeah, you don't want to do that. You don't want to learn that lesson. We actually learn that lesson from them, from the group of people around us and certain, groups. If you have a culture, weak or strong culture, as in cohesion, that there are strong standards or weak standards. At some point, if you have a culture, then some of these questions, they don't come down to morality or ethics. They don't come down to laws or whatever else. It's just people like us do these things. And so if you see something that's not up to standard and you let it go, you've now started that process of social learning that we are the type of group that will let things not be up to standard.
In my new book, Moments That Matter, it comes out in March. If anyone's interested in March 24th, and after, you can go grab it on Amazon. Prior to that, you can go to chrisdyer.com/moments to put in your email. I'm happy to let you know when it comes out, or learn more about it. But you know, part of the crux of the book is that um, we have to show up in the big moments. We are often told, as you sort of alluded to, like trying to be perfect in every little moment, or trying to make everything count and make everything urgent and make everything a mountain to climb. And what I have found is that nobody remembers any of the Tuesday 10 a.m. meetings that we had. Nobody remembers any of the millions of interactions that I had with them, but they remember when I showed up big in a big moment, when something big happened. And I said, no, 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 people like us don't do things like that. And or that's not right, and we're not going to handle a client treated an employee really poorly, and I said that's not okay, and I called the client and said, do that again and you're not going to be our client. Right? Like, I put a line in the sand, and when I showed up big, or my leaders showed up big for their people in those ways, that's what people remembered. And so when those things happen, you've got to show up, and you've got to also release that feeling that you need to get everything right all the time. And instead, you need to be more present about when is this a big moment? They always say don't sweat the small stuff. That's cool. Another way to say that is, make sure you freaking show up when it's something big. Make sure you're ready. Make sure you show up on your horse with your flag and your giant sword for your people, and you're like, I'm here and I'm gonna help you with this, and we're gonna take care of this. And then the little stuff, you just shut up and let them do their thing, right? Let them figure it out and get out of their way. And what I find is that leaders are really struggling to do that right now, because they feel so unclear about what's happening. They feel inept about the technological changes in AI. They feel like we're in that place where, remember, like when interns were like reverse mentoring senior executives on like how to use Facebook or how to use yourself. Like, we're back in that kind of mode again, where the young kids know how to use the stuff that they are. I just did a LinkedIn post about this. Like 64% of leaders say they wish they could ask for help, but they feel like it makes them look bad. So we're in this really weird spot of, we need to show up big in the right spots and get the help that we can get, and really think about what our people need from us and what they don't.
Have there been experiences that you've had in, the last year or two or however long it's been that helped you decide that moments that matter were that was the thing that really needed your attention?
So I tell this story in my keynotes, and also in the book. It's the opening story in the book. Um, I had some former employees that I ended up having dinner with. and they had done really well. They got good bonuses from me selling the company. The new company loves them, has given them promotions, has given them raises. They have more opportunity. It's a bigger organization. They have a lot more more mobility. They have all kinds of great opportunities, right? And from where I'm sitting, like they're doing great. And what was interesting to me is after we had had a few drinks and had dinner and, they got a little more courage or a little bit less filtered. They said some version of to me that they were still mad at me. And I was like, "What do you mean you're mad at me? Like, you guys are doing great." And they said, "No, we're mad at you. We're still mad at you for selling the company." And I'm like, and I'm arguing back with them, "But you're doing so great and you got all this stuff and blah, 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 blah." And they said, "No." And one of the employees said, "Listen, the, there's nothing wrong with the new company. CEO's great, the company's great, the people are great, but the work's not the same." And I was like, okay. And then the other former employee said to me, "I would give back all of the money and all the titles and everything to be back working in the old company. That was the best of times." And so it was like one of the best worst compliments to get. And they weren't saying this about me personally. Like, I mean, I had obviously something to do with it, but like they were talking about how we operated as an organization and how we thought about things. And that had shifted, that had changed. And they were still in a good organization. There was nothing, we're not unhappy, but they knew that it was different. And so it took me like I'm really taken back by this point. And so it was probably I had too many glasses of wine, but like it took me a minute to like figure out what are you really saying here? And what I got from them was they said, "Do you remember when we talked about what happened during COVID? That we talked about what we did during the recession. We talked about what we did for employees when they lost their power when in Texas, like in the winter. We talked about what we did for employees when someone important in their life passed away. Like, and I was like, oh, you're talking about specific moments." And they were like, yeah, like the organization showed up in moments that were really big. And they didn't say this, but I think what they were trying to say was their new organization was just sort of responding to all moments equally and doing their best. And they were good, nothing wrong. And we're not complaining in any way. But that's different than I don't always get the little moments right, but man, do I get the big moments right because that's what people remember. And that really, that was the shift I needed to go, this is, again, this is just me getting, we started the conversation off with this. This is me getting lucky and going, and just going, that's interesting. Let me run down that path. And I ended up writing a book. And it turns out that moments matter in every part of our life. So my other books have all been like business books. This is an elevated, yes, it's about business, but it's also about how you show up for your spouse, or your partner, for your kids, for your neighbors, for your community, right? Like anywhere in your life, you got to know when you're in a moment, you need to know what to do. And then you got to figure out how to make sure that the people you care about know what you did so that they know you're going to do that for them too. Doesn't do you any good to like show up for your friend if none of your other friends know that you're a really good friend. It's not about bragging, but like if other people know that you're a good person, then they're more likely to maintain that friendship or that relationship with you because they know who you are and what you care. What people like us do things like this, right? It's another way of kind of proving that to people.
If I'm not asking you to give away too much of your guidance in the book, how do I recognize that it's one of those moments?
It's a good question. Um, so our body is actually telling us that we're about to enter a big moment, and 99% of us completely ignore it. That's the headline, okay? We get the racing heart and the sweaty palms and the nervous feeling and the like our bodies react and we take that as stress, but it's not stress. This is your body telling you, this is it getting excited and it getting in tune with, uh-oh, something big's happening. And what we typically do is go, I'm stressed out. I can't handle this right now. I can't deal with one more thing. I don't want to have this difficult conversation with my wife right now. Or I don't want to have this. I don't have to tell my neighbor that they're being a jerk to the other neighbor. Like what? And we just shove it down and we don't deal with it. Right. So our bodies are telling us through one of many different physical responses that, hey, you could be in a moment right now. And so that's the first thing is to start being in tune with when I start to feel this way, why? And that's like in the book, I suggest take 30 seconds, do some like little breathing, a little tiny meditation, and just say, Is this a moment? Is this a big deal for me? Is this a big deal for somebody else? Like, if it's tomorrow, I'm going to be like, I don't even remember this thing. Well, then no, it was a small thing. But if I'm like, no, like, geez, seems like a big deal for Eric. Like he's probably going to talk about this next week and next month and next year. Like this is a big thing. I can't just run past it and ignore it. Or I mean, if I found out that someone really important in your life just got diagnosed with cancer, I could ignore it. I could send you an email. I could text you. I might pick up the phone and call you. Or if like you were in the same town as me, maybe I might offer to go have coffee with you or go have a beer and like talk to you about it. There's a different way for me to show up if I know it's a big deal to you, or if I know it's a big deal for me. And there's two ways to think about it, right? Am I in a moment, or do I know someone who's in a moment? So that's the first step. Then there's like 7 different types of moments, and you got to figure out like what you got to do in those different types of moments to show up correctly. But the first step is always just like, am I even in a moment? And then that's where most people fail.
Did I understand you correctly earlier? And forgive me for not recalling exactly how you put it, but did I understand you as sort of saying that uh, there's a German philosopher or somebody who said something like, we shaved the top of the mountains and filled in the valleys or something along those lines. And I thought of that when you were saying something to the effect of, we just don't have those moments anymore your former colleagues or employees were saying that. And I was maybe making some assumptions as you were talking about this, but it sounded to me like whether it was in that situation with the new ownership or if it's generally in other companies, it kind of sounded to me like you were saying we miss the opportunity to deliver upon one of these moments. And sometimes the reason is because we have instituted we have our own behaviors that we have, fallen into habits or whatever, or we've instituted processes to negate lows, to get rid of to mitigate all of the bad things. But what we've also lost in creating a lot of process or these kind of muted responses to things is we've gotten in the way of delivering upon the the opportunity to show up in these moments.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure there was intentional things that went away when the new organization, took over things completely. And that's to be expected. And that's not a criticism of them. And they have their own way of doing things. Um, and there's probably employees in the organization that thinks they're the best place that they're ever going to work. I mean, it's just, so it's, it's just that the bigger you get and the more you're doing and the more responsibilities you have and the more people you're managing, the more intentional you have to be to make sure that those big moments that you show up for them. And I just want to keep reiterating, like, you're gonna screw up 1,000 moments. You're gonna screw up things all the time as a human being or as a leader or whatever. But don't let it be the big ones. Like the more you can do to get those right, the mass forgiveness you get about all your other screw ups and things you didn't do right. But if you miss the big stuff, nobody cares how many little things you did good. Nobody cares. I mean, look at Boeing. Boeing had millions of flights that landed correctly with no problems, great safety records. And then the 737 MAX had problems and they did not deal with it very well. We had 2 crashes and suddenly I won't get on a 737 MAX. Like I do not trust them. I wouldn't for like a year and a half. If I saw that was my plane, I changed my flight. I would not get on one of those. They had two crashes. They did everything correctly. All those flights, millions of but 2 planes go down. They got those 2 big moments wrong, and we saw that they did not handle the problems with that plane the way they should have. And they've gotten that rectified. I will now get on the 737 MAX. But there was a period of time when like I all of those little good deeds did not matter, right? Because they screwed up the it was maybe they had nothing to do. It was a terrible mistake that the planes went down, but how they reacted, everything they did after that showed that they really didn't they couldn't be trusted in that time period. And so that we see that inside the organizations all the times when something big happens and the you ever seen that meme where Homer Simpson like disappears into the bush? Like that's what how employees say their leaders act when something big happens. And that's not what they need.
There are 1,000 ways to break something. There are very few ways to do it right or to put things together, however we want to phrase it. And, you know, thankfully, if I have a conversation with my child or my spouse or an interaction with a colleague, while I can, in the terminology I was just using, I can do something wrong or break something, and yet I can turn around pretty quickly and say, I can recover. In some respects, I could say, I'm sorry, or I made a mistake, or whatever. Thankfully, we can do that. But I think some of what I'm assuming comes out in the book is also, hey, you're going to screw things up. But the next moment, maybe, is how do you respond to screwing it up or things not going right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. But we have to like deal with our mistakes and deal with our transgressions and all that stuff. But I just the grace that you get from people when you have shown up for them in a big way, you know? And we never took advantage of this. It was never like it wasn't calculated, but you know, we used to send big, giant, ridiculous flowers. When someone had someone in their like very close their life pass away and they had to go to a funeral. And then it was a little subjective how we tried to figure that out. It wasn't like we could let that to each leader to kind of figure out was this someone really important in their lives or or just their old friend from high school or something, right? But if they felt like it was someone like really there's really an intense moment for that employee, we would send a giant like the thing on the easel, like the giant flowers, like from the company and like it's specifically from their team. And they remembered that, right? Like the fact they spent the entire day answering questions about their job to all of their friends and family at the funeral. Was like, who was that from? Who was that giant? And it was, oh, that's from our company. Oh my, I can't believe they did that. And so like the day sort of became about something, even though we weren't trying to like take away from that, but like that employee was having a slightly positive little experience inside of a very negative one. And it was like, but us just trying to show up for them and to tell them we care about them and we support them. And dude, I had so many people write the most incredible thank you notes for us doing that. And we were just trying to do it to like really, we know that was a big moment for them and wanted to show up for them. Hands down, that's it. There's nothing else tied to that. But I can tell you the outcomes of that were how much they cared about us doing that, how appreciative they were. And I know that when someone called them up and said, hey, I got 25 more cents an hour for you over here for the competitor down the street, that gave us a level of insulation. We didn't do it for that reason, but I know as an outcome that happened, right? Because people knew who we were and what we cared about, and what we were going to do. They were going to take the risk that someone else, even if they were going to pay them a little bit more, was going to do that kind of thing for them too, in the next company. And so again, that's why you got to show up and you got to make sure people know about it. Um, if you want them to know how to act and what you're going to do, because hopefully everyone else on the team is never going to have that experience. Hopefully none of them have a really important person die in their life, like while they're working for us. Statistically possible, but hopefully that never happens. But they know how we would react if it did, because what we did for the other employee on their team. So it's just, there's so many ways to do this stuff. There's so many ways to like think about showing up in an authentic way that's true to you or true to your company or whatever. But you gotta recognize that and figure out what you gotta do.
The book will come out around the time this episode releases. I forget the exact schedule, but whether it's the book or it's you, Chris, or somewhere else, where should I go to learn more, connect, buy the book or whatever else? And if you were going to leave me with words of wisdom or something to think about after today, whether we've talked about it already or not, what would that thing be?
Well, if you're interested in connecting, I'm happy to connect with anybody on all of the social media platforms. So if you hang out somewhere, I'm there. You can also go to my website, chrisdyer.com /moments if you want to learn more about the book, the new book. You can also find all my social stuff there. And yeah, as far as like what to leave you with, one of the things that I really had to learn that we did not get to, that I think helps in everything that we've talked about today, is what you focus on grows. So if you focus on what are my best employees doing, if you focus on what do my best clients care about, if you focus on why do my best salespeople do so well, if that's what your focus is, like, well, how do we meet better and how do we create great, what are my best leaders doing? If that's what you are focused on, you're going to get more of those behaviors, more of those kinds of people, because you're sending that signal that what you care about. If you walk around looking for problems, focused on the people who aren't performing, focused on why these two salespeople can't meet their number, and now you're like all over them and you're putting them on a pip and you're in all their calls and you're getting CC'd on their emails and you're like, you're just going to get more of that crap. And when we really put our attention on excellence, which is why I told you I want you to make this the best organization that your people are ever going to work. When you put your focus on excellence, people rise up. That sort of the level of mediocre, it rises up a bit, right? And the people who can't keep up, it's either very clear that they cannot keep up and you know what you need to do. Or what happens more often is they self-select out. They go find another job, they quit, they leave because they're like, there is no way I'm ever going to make it in this company. If this is the level of excellence, if that's what you're going to do, I better go find another job where I can just kick it and take it easy over there. And so I almost never had to fire the underperforming salesperson. Like they would come to me and be like, I can't do this. Cause we're like ignoring them. Like we're good. We're talking about how do we give more resources? How do we help our top salespeople? Like, how do we, and I'm like, this one person over here, like, you can't figure it out. Well, maybe it's not the right job for you, buddy. So we started to deal with it, but like our first focus was always what's working, what's good, and how do we put our more attention, more resources, more energy, more conversation around that. Everything else just seemed to fix itself.
Most of what you said today, Chris, reminds me of a lot, which I really appreciate because that gives me the opportunity to ask you, well, what do you think about this? And, what's your approach? And that does as well. But I know that I can't keep you here all day. So there is more to learn or hear about, whether it's reading the book or checking you out in your social media channels. So that is what I will do. And that's where I'll leave it for everyone. So, Chris, I really appreciate you being here. I've enjoyed the conversation. And although I have not read the new book yet, I have read The Power of Company Culture and I enjoyed it. So thank you again for being here, Chris.
Thanks so much for having me. It was really enjoyable to spend some time with you.